Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are all having an amazing day so far. So in this video we'll be creating another modern family home within the Sims 4, but this time we're trying to focus on creating something that felt a bit more elegant and sort of just like carried those traditional sort of themes and styles from it, if that makes sense. So I was trying to go for something that sort of resembled a bit more old money, felt a bit more classical, and just like a generic manner that you would probably expect to see within like a hillside estate, if that makes sense. So yeah, I wanted to create this within Del Sol Valley on the 50 by 40 lot because I just feel like that city view just looked really nice, and it ties in really well with sort of creating a manor that was like away from the city and just like felt really elegant and extravagant, if that makes sense. And I just started off by just like placing some of the windows and doors that I knew I definitely wanted to utilize within this build, because they're just like some of my go-to ones when I try to like create a more detailed and extravagant looking build like this, if that makes sense. And I also spared you guys the burden of watching me build and deal with these circular walls just by like cutting through some of them, just like skipping parts of it when I was going on to like building them and stuff, because I know they can be quite tedious and quite annoying to work with, but I feel like the end result when utilizing them actually looks really nice in a lot of builds, to be honest, especially when you're using them for like these terrace sort of like balcony areas and stuff. I feel like they give a very nice and like elegant looking feel to it, if that makes sense. But yeah, there's not really a lot of functional objects and stuff like that within these circular rooms within this part of the home, so you don't have to really worry about any of the glitches and bugs that actually come with utilizing those round walls, because I do understand like when you guys go to play within the builds, it is quite annoying to play within those like circular walls because they do come with quite a lot of glitches, and it's kind of a shame that it's been quite a while now without them being fixed. But regardless, I didn't really utilize them in a lot of like areas, so you don't have to worry too much about them. But I really wanted to utilize more like shapes and like styles within throughout the entire home, rather than just like relying on those like simple like boxy and rectangular looking designs, which is what I really love doing within the Sims, because I just love creating these like modern and minimalistic looking homes. But I wanted to create something for you guys that looked a bit more traditional, something that incorporated a lot more like design and had a bit more like taste, if that makes sense. But yeah, we did actually go for a more elegant looking feel within the entire like interior, so we do actually go for something that looked a bit more fancy, and you would see what I mean by that as we progress later in the video. But right now I was just trying to create the front area of the home, which is, I sort of just like had an idea of like what I wanted to do anyway based on the image that I was looking at already, but sort of just like trying to get some inspiration from it, just like trying to get the sort of like idea across from it. And once we move on to the back garden, you would see how it just like looks so different from the front of the home, which I feel like makes it look a bit more interesting in my opinion as well. And I tried to add a lot of details as much as possible that I could throughout the entire home, such as like utilizing these concrete balustrades as like the balcony fencing, because I feel like they are the best when it comes to creating these like more elegant looking feeling homes, if that makes sense. It's just like a very nice looking sort of fence design, especially in real life as well as like the incorporation of these like very modern looking columns as well. They look really modern but also very classical as well at the same time, because they're very simple yet have a lot of detail on them, which I feel like looks really interesting, and just like add some additional details throughout the entire home as well. And we do actually utilize quite a lot of friezes and exterior trims going on across the entire home, whether it's like next to the roof or right in the center of like the first and second floor. But I just feel like they added that extra detail that this home really needed, because we actually utilize a relatively simple sort of wallpaper going on across the entire home, but I feel like that really helped with adding that extra detail that this house sort of needed. And since a lot of like the roof, not the roof trims, but like the wall trims and like the exterior skirting and whatever they're called, like the freezers, they are quite big, so I kind of had to utilize a really tall wall height to just like sort of come across and like work with them, if that makes sense. And since I was actually utilizing a lot of roofing and like a lot of detailing, I really had to make sure I was trying to get as much of the spaces as right as possible, if that makes sense. But I feel like it turned out really nice overall and sort of just like worked in my favor in like how I wanted to create this build, and I feel like it turned out really nice. So you guys can let me know what you guys think about this build in the comment sections down below. I would love to know your thoughts and suggestions. If you guys like this sort of design, if you guys like a more modern looking design, I don't really mind building huge houses in any design or style, as long as like people are really interested in it and as long as it actually looks visually appealing. I wouldn't really mind creating something that looks a bit more old-fashioned or a bit more modern, if that makes sense. It sort of just like goes with like however I'm feeling or whatever I really wanted to create in that moment. But I feel like there's just so much modern houses and stuff like that going on across throughout my channel right now that I feel like I really need to start creating something that looked a bit more different, so there's just like a bit more variation on the channel, if that makes sense. But yeah, I'm really happy with this overall build and how it turned out. But yeah, we also incorporated a lot of platforming throughout the entire home. So going across like to the entrance of the home already, we raised the platform up by like 4 times already, because I wanted something that looked really extravagant and grand, and I couldn't really get that, especially if the entire home is based on a flat ground, because I was really trying to make this house pop as much as possible, just like trying to use a lot of staircases and like stairways to make it feel as extravagant as possible, just like trying to mimic and manipulate the terrain without actually using the terrain tool to make it look as interesting as possible, if that makes sense. And we're going for this really old tiling for the front of the home because I feel like that sort of kind of makes sense for these like old manors and mansions and stuff. But we did actually end up changing some of them to be the terrain paint as well, because it sort of added some variation to the ones that was based on the platforms, if that makes sense. And it sort of just like added a nice looking design to it rather than having it all the same, if that makes sense. And we do actually incorporate a tennis as well as a basketball area at the front of the home as well, which is kind of like a unique take because I don't really utilize a lot of these like functional objects at the front of the, I sort of create them in the back garden areas rather than the front. But once I was like looking at this inspiration image and I feel like that looked really good at the front of the home, so I was like, you know what, it might actually look pretty decent for the front of the home for our home as well. So yeah, I feel like it turned out really nice, and I feel like it sort of just like ended up being something that looked really nice and different. But yeah, so paying more attention to the back side of the home now, we can see how boxy and minimalistic and simple it looked, and I just didn't really like how there was like a lot of rectangles and squares. So I just wanted to add a lot of different like rooms and stuff that sort of poked out from the main compartments of the home, which I feel like made it look a bit more interesting, as well as incorporating a very interesting looking sort of balcony area which had this very unique looking curve, as well as following the trend that we had for the front of the home by utilizing those concrete balustrades, which I feel like looked super nice, and it just added to how elegant this home really was. And I didn't really base the back garden of this home to any specific like real life home or whatnot. I sort of just like went with what I felt like looked best in my opinion, just like trying to do stuff by like trial and error and just like seeing what I feel like would look nicer for this back garden area of the home, especially since we're trying to go for that manor feel. I really wanted to keep the scale and size of it respectfully like big enough for it to sort of like count as one of those, if that makes sense. So yeah, I just tried to add as many different rooms as I could for the back garden area of this home, just to like make it feel a bit more extravagant, if that makes sense. And once I was really happy with the shaping of the home, as well as like incorporating all of the roofing, which I had to skip because I didn't want to bore you guys through all of that boring sort of like roofing that I had to do, because especially since for this home, since it had like quite a lot of like different complex looking shapes to it and whatnot, I just wanted to like sort of show you guys the parts that looked relatively more interesting in my opinion. But yeah, moving on to the back side of the home, I also wanted to incorporate a fancy looking pool, and I feel like the best way I could possibly do that was just by like utilizing the swimming pool, as well as like trying to create a unique shape to it rather than always having the rectangular corners to it. And I sort of feel like this curved swimming pool gave a different vibe to this home overall, which I feel like I like the look of it a bit more rather than just like utilizing the same old rectangular pools, if that makes sense. And I just really love how we have that huge sort of second floor balcony area that sort of just like hangs out from like the main part of the home, which I feel like looks really interesting. And once again, just to like add to like the cohesiveness throughout the entire home, we're utilizing the same columns as well as like the same like exterior trims and friezes going on throughout the entire home as well, because I wanted to keep the same consistency going on throughout the entire home, if that makes sense. And I was kind of puzzled with what kind of windows I wanted to go with for this home, because there was quite a lot of options, but there wasn't something that really stood out to me in particular. I knew I wanted some windows that had incorporated like a lot of curves, because we do have quite a lot of like arches and stuff going on across the entire home as well, in the interior as well as on the exterior. So I wanted to sort of replicate that for the windows and the designs of the windows itself as well. So I tried to use ones that had the appropriate color swatches as well as like unique designs to it, if that makes sense, because I wanted something that looked a bit more interesting rather than utilizing the same old rectangular ones. And I can't really remember which pack I used for the windows in particular, but these ones I sort of just like combined 3 different ones all into like one sort of section, if that makes sense, and sort of like replicated the same design throughout certain parts of the exterior parts of the home, if that makes sense. And I also utilized these very huge arch ones, which actually I believe came from the Business and Hobbies expansion pack, which I really love how simple it looks, but also has that like nice arch frame to it, which I feel like made it look really interesting. And this top part of the balcony area, I feel like it looked really nice. I sort of wanted to incorporate these nice curves to it from the arches as well as like from the actual fence area itself as well, which I feel like looked really interesting. And I knew I wanted to incorporate some sort of fencing on the back garden area of this home, especially since it's like right on top of a cliffside, and you know, it doesn't have any like safety and stuff. I mean, it's not really that detrimental in The Sims because it's not really realistic, but I still wanted to sort of like keep it in theme and just like add to the additional details that I wanted to include. So I actually just utilized the debug concrete balustrades which came from Discover University, which I just love utilizing when it comes to creating these more elegant looking homes, and especially since it sort of just like matched the theme that I was trying to go for, as well as like the existing fences that we were utilizing throughout the entire home. It only made sense to just like utilize those in my opinion. And we also utilize a lot of manicured and sophisticated looking sort of hedges and a lot of like greenery areas throughout the entire home as well, just to make it feel like it was like well kept, and just like trying to make it look as interesting as possible that fit the sort of vibe that we're trying to go for this home. I feel like if you were trying to go for a more elegant looking feel, you probably have a very sophisticated looking garden attached to the home or somewhere around the home, which I feel like worked really nicely because I didn't really overdo it with a lot of the greenery throughout the entire home. There was sort of just like an even amount of it, if that makes sense, because sometimes I could really go ahead and just like utilize a lot of different like gardens and just like create so many different compartments and just add a lot of greenery, which I feel like makes it look really busy, and it does look nice, but I feel like it's not really that, you know, appealing in my opinion. But I feel like this was like the perfect amount, which had that sort of just like, it incorporated a lot of greenery, but it also looked very clean and simple as well, especially since we had a lot of like pathways and walkways as well. And we also incorporated a lot of color throughout all of the hedges and like a lot of just like different plants and variations throughout all of the sort of like flower beds, if you want to call it that, I guess. And I did also lower some of the hedges as well in certain areas throughout the entire home as well, to make it feel and fit in with the vibe that I was trying to go for, because they were relatively tall, and I just lowered them by just like utilizing the tool mod, which is pretty much like the only mod that I use along with the better build by mod, which come in super handy when you're trying to create a lot of builds like me. And yeah, so moving on into the back garden area, we're actually starting to furnish most of the areas of the home, and we're starting off with the exterior back garden area, which I feel like it turned out really nice because I didn't overdo it with the plants for the back garden area either. I just kept it really nice and simple, just trying to keep them in like these very huge extravagant looking fancy vases and vases and stuff. I tried to utilize some flower beds that were like completely empty and just like added my own plants into them, which I feel like kind of gave it that nice unique sort of like custom touch in my opinion, which I feel like looked really nice, as well as just like adding some nice simple furnishings throughout this entire balcony area, just like trying to create some like small sort of private seating areas, just like dividing them through like plants and trees, adding some very nice fireplaces, as well as like a huge dining table right next to where the swimming pool is, as well as like incorporating a nice outdoor barbecue sort of kitchen area, just like trying to make it feel a bit lively as well, because I feel like it will be a nice area to sort of just like entertain your entire family, and just like adding a lot of like seating area throughout the home as well. I feel like that's kind of like common throughout all of these modern huge mansions and stuff, as well as like through all of these elegant homes as well. They just have a lot of these like very plentiful sort of like seating areas, which I really wanted to incorporate and sort of like replicate throughout the entire home as well, because there's not really much else that you can really place for the exteriors for these homes in my opinion. There's just like quite a lot of seating that you can just like add to make it feel a bit more lively and built in and lived in, if that makes sense. But yeah, moving on into the interior now, you can sort of get a gist of what the sort of coloring and the wallpapers that I went for. I sort of went for this more minimalistic modern style, as I mentioned a few times in this video. Now we're trying to go for a more elegant looking feel, so this was like the best way that I could sort of just like get that image across, if that makes sense. And once again, I am utilizing my favorite kitchen set, which is the one that came from the most recent base game update. I just really love these counters, especially since everyone is going to be able to utilize them. They just have the exact same like sort of style and vibe that I'll probably pick in real life as well, and I just really like how simple it looks, and it comes in so many different color swatches. It's pretty much a super like amazing kitchen counter in my opinion, and it's just really great that everyone has this one in particular. So I'll probably pretty much always use this one unless I'm trying to create something specific in other builds, but I feel like this was like the perfect one for this build in particular. And yeah, just tried to make it feel really built in and just like really extravagant, especially since we're utilizing the tallest wall height, and we have these very unique looking stairs going straight down into like the kitchen area from the like front foyer area of the home. I feel like it was such a unique sort of layout and shape for this build. And if you guys are interested in seeing the entire rooms and all of the like small sort of like details going on throughout the entire home, I highly recommend you guys stick towards the end of the video if you guys want to check out the tour, so that you guys can pretty much get a gist of the entire layout and sort of like structure of the entire home, if that makes sense, rather than seeing it in like a build view, if that makes sense. But yeah, this is just like a very huge and extravagant kitchen. I wanted to incorporate some brass elements throughout certain parts of the kitchen, such as like through like the handrails, as well as like some of the utensils, and just like through some of the additional like appliances and just like the clutter pieces, because I feel like that is like the common most like generic way to just like create a elegant looking vibe to it, because I feel like white on white just looks a bit too simple, just like trying to add some color here and there. But yeah, I just really love this overall style, so I do apologize if you guys were expecting a bit more color, but in certain areas of the home we do actually have plenty more colors throughout the entire home. But for the main areas of the home, such as like the living space and the kitchen, I sort of kept it like a nice plain white simple color scheme, because I just really love how minimalistic and simple it looks in my opinion. But it still also has those important details that you would probably expect in a manor, because the cabinets, as you have seen, they have those like very nice detailings on them, as especially since it has like that marble top. I feel like that wouldn't really be seen in a more minimalistic looking home, if that makes sense. So rather than utilizing one that came from the dream home decorator, I feel like it's kind of made sense to utilize this more busy looking one, in my opinion. And I also tried to create the built-in section of the home, which housed the sort of coffee station area, as well as like the built-in fridge, which I feel like looked really nice and interesting, and sort of just like tucked it away from the main area of the kitchen, if that makes sense. And I really love how we had those 3 French doors just like looking straight into the garden area. I feel like that looked really nice and really dreamy, in my opinion. And we do actually have curtains over there later in the video as well, but I just really love how this dining table also fits so perfectly in this like small sort of hallway corridor area that we have going on, which I feel like looked really nice. And especially since with all of like the elevation and the stairs going across the entire home as well, and I sort of feel like it gave that elegant touch that I was trying to go for this home in particular, because I really didn't want to create something that looked really generic. Even though I was utilizing a lot of this like plain white theme, I still wanted to create something that looked really interesting visually through like the flooring, as well as like the wallpapers, as well as like the curtain choices that I picked, which I picked quite a lot of curtain choices, which you would see throughout pretty much all of the bedrooms. I try to incorporate a nice unique design and style to them, which you'll see as we progress onto them. But right now we're focusing on the office section of the home, which incorporates that very huge sort of rectangular but then ends in a curve. I just feel like that looks really nice and interesting. And since we're actually utilizing the really tall wall heights, I wanted to incorporate a bookshelf that looked really interesting. I wanted the bookshelves at the top end of them to have a very unique looking arch to them, but unfortunately the ones that I found in the game were relatively like short and were sort of like more appropriate for a shorter wall height, which unfortunately wasn't really what I was trying to go for. I didn't really want it to look really like short or like really skinny, if that makes sense. So unfortunately I had to go with these ones, but this was still sort of just like aligning with the vision that I was trying to go for. I really loved how this looked because it was sort of like a really nice open space. I just feel like it looked really grand, and it felt grand as well as I was building it, because that was sort of just like the goal that I was trying to go for. And I knew I wanted to incorporate an open space sort of like office sort of like library area for this home. A lot of grand mansions and a lot of like these manors would probably incorporate something like this within their homes, so this was sort of like my opportunity to create something like that within this build as well. And I just really love how it turned out, because I feel like it really does convey those traditional designs that you would probably expect to see in a typical office or a library, especially when we utilize that dark brown color. I feel like that is really common in a lot more older traditional looking manors, in my opinion. And I feel like a lot of modern homes also incorporate this color as well, which I feel like is not really my favorite, but I feel like it works really nicely when you're trying to mix it up with the different colors that you have going on across the entire room, especially since we're using a very elegant wallpaper. I feel like anything that you put right next to this wallpaper works really nicely. And we are actually utilizing the wall sconces, which came from Growing Together as well, which is one of my favorites. It just has this very nice brass color to it, and it just like has a very nice simple circular bulb, which works really nicely for this build in particular, because we had a lot of curves going on across the entire home anyway. So yeah, I just felt like that was like the greatest choice for this build in particular. But yeah, we do also have a very nice and spacious looking bedroom on the first floor, right next to where this kitchen and office space is, which I just really love how it turned out, because it just incorporates these nice unique details and designs, especially with the curtains going across the top section of the bed itself, as well as like the nice unique curtains that I utilized for the windows itself as well. I just feel like it's like a really nice change, especially if you are a member of the channel. You'll probably see that I don't really utilize a lot of curtains throughout all of my builds, but I was just really happy with the ones that I've chosen throughout this entire build. They just felt really grand and elegant, in my opinion. And yeah, I just really loved how it tied in really nicely with all of the fancy bedrooms that I was trying to create. But yeah, so moving on into the second room that we have, like right opposite where that sort of bedroom was on the first floor, we actually do have a very simple looking gym, which also is where the sort of like diagonal section of the home is. And I just really love how this turned out, because especially since we don't really have a lot of like gym equipment or like functional gym equipment that you can actually utilize throughout the game, I feel like there's not really that much to do anyway. So I feel like it kind of makes sense to keep the gyms in a smaller location and area for the homes, in my opinion, rather than having a lot of like negative space in the gym, in my opinion. I just tried to place as much of the gym furniture equipment in the best places possible, and just like try to create a busy looking one rather than having one that felt like really empty and bare. Even though I feel like it's more realistic, I feel like it kind of made sense to just make it feel a bit more busy and just like incorporate all of the gym equipment that we possibly have. But yeah, so moving on into the living space, I just really love how this living space turned out as well, because it's something that looks really unique and different from what I'm used to building, because it's on that de-elevated area of the home, which I feel like looks really nice. We have this really unique stretched out hallway, and it just leads to these like sort of smaller de-elevated location areas, if that makes sense. And I just feel like it looked really nice, especially since we are utilizing a lot more of the elegant looking furniture pieces. And I'm also utilizing that sofa, which I believe came from one of the more recent kits, which I believe was based around like Bella Goth, but I just really loved how it looked, especially since it sort of carried that old-fashioned vibe, in my opinion. I feel like that kind of goes with what I was trying to go for this build, I guess. And I also utilized one of the painting TVs as well, because I feel like I wanted to keep the space functional but also make it feel a bit more like historical and traditional, if that makes sense. And I also just utilized a very simple rug under it. I mean, it's not really that simple, it's quite detailed, but it sort of just like carries a more muted color scheme to it, if that makes sense. It doesn't really have a lot of like bright bold colors, which I feel like kind of makes sense with the more elegant style that I was trying to go for. And it actually broke up the color scheme that we had going on throughout the entire living space itself, so it sort of like made the sofas and like the armchairs stand out a little bit more, in my opinion. And I did also decide to add these columns into the living space as well, along with like trying to create a very interesting and unique looking sort of living space, just by like trying to incorporate these curtains on top of the columns and stuff like that. I feel like it might look a bit exaggerated, but I actually looked at quite a lot of inspirational images for the interiors of like old manors and mansions and stuff like that, and a lot of them really loved incorporating this like very white theme to it. Even though they weren't the exact same color textures and styles and whatnot, they still had like these very extravagant and exaggerated curtains, like drapes across like throughout the entire room and stuff like that. And I just feel like that looked really interesting, so I wanted to incorporate something like that within this build as well. And you would see that, and it's quite a prominent sort of design that we have going across throughout all of the bedrooms, as well as like a lot of the main public areas of the home where there's like a lot of windows and stuff. I wanted to incorporate these very extravagant and modern looking curtains, which I feel like worked out really nicely in the end, in my opinion. And I did also replace certain sections of the home to like have a bit more of like those French doors, just so there's like more external functionality, and so you could just like navigate throughout the entire home better, if that makes sense, rather than having to utilize a lot of the stairs, which I believe we do have quite a lot of throughout this entire home. But yeah, so moving on into the second bedroom that we have on the first floor, I still wanted to keep that really glamorous and extravagant theme throughout all of the bedrooms. So you would see quite a lot of this like unique drape sort of like curtain theme going on across throughout all of the bedrooms, but I just really love how that design and style turned out. And for this room in particular, we're going for a more muted pinkish sort of gold and white theme, because I wanted to incorporate some color, but I didn't want it to pop out too much, if that makes sense. So this is what I meant by like incorporating certain colorful elements throughout the build. So we only utilize it in certain areas of the build, such as like the bathrooms, as well as like the bedrooms and like specific functional rooms, rather than like having the main areas of the home be super colorful and stuff like that. I just feel like it works really nicely in this way, in my opinion. And I did also incorporate a very simple sort of like seating area, as well as like a nice simple easel in this small circular area of the front of the home. So there's not really that much functionality to the front of this like curved area of the home, so I feel like it's not really that much to worry about if you guys don't really want to play in this circular area of the home. But I feel like it was just like a nice touch to add something that felt a bit more different and functional to the build, in my opinion. But yeah, moving on into the second floor now, we're actually starting off with another bedroom, and this is a more colorful bedroom. As you guys can see, we're going for a more blue theme for it, and I just really love how it turned out, because we're going for these more traditional looking furniture pieces, which I'm not really used to utilizing. So it was kind of like a fun build for me as well, because I was creating and utilizing objects that I don't really commonly use, because I usually love utilizing the Dream Home Decorator modular pieces throughout all of my modern builds. But obviously, since this wasn't really focused on creating a modern build, I sort of just like utilized more traditional and sort of like styles that looked a bit more classic, in my opinion, which I feel like turned out really nice, in my opinion, especially since we have quite a lot of that throughout this entire game anyway. And this is one of the bedrooms that do actually have their own ensuite as well, which is sort of just like utilizing that nice simple curve, but we don't actually add too much functionality into it. It's just like the main bathtub area, which is on that curve, which really shouldn't provide any issues in your games, to be honest. But I feel like that turned out really nicely overall. And I do also populate some of the hallways as well as we're progressing throughout the build as well, but I do actually go back later on and just like add some additional seating area, as well as like some more musical instruments throughout this entire hallway area as well, just like trying to populate it to make it feel a bit more busy rather than leaving it really bare. But yeah, we do actually go back to that later on in the video towards the end. But moving on into the master or primary bedroom, as we would like to call it, we have a super spacious sort of like master bedroom in the center of the home, which is like focused towards the back garden area, which has that very huge sort of circular balcony area, which I feel like looked really nice and extravagant. And they do also have a sort of like closed off sort of balcony area as well, which I feel like looks really fancy and just like added to the extravagantness of this entire home. I feel like it worked out really nicely with the sort of like style that I was trying to go for. And once again, I just utilized my favorite themes and just like my favorite furniture pieces when it comes to creating these more traditional builds and designs. And I knew I wanted to incorporate a very nice fireplace along with some additional functional objects, such as like a lot of like seating areas, a nice simple TV, and just like trying to create a nice muted looking bedroom, which I feel like turned out really nice. And I started building the wardrobe within the bedroom itself, but then I realized that we do actually have its own sort of like wing that we can also incorporate to sort of just like act as if it feels like a walk-in wardrobe, if that makes sense. So instead I just moved it all into this small sort of like room, which is towards the right hand side of the home, which I feel like looked really nice. And I also wanted to utilize that shoe shelving unit which came from the Get Famous expansion pack, which I feel like looks really fancy and sort of fits the theme that we're trying to go for this home as well. But yeah, just try to create a very nice and simple looking walk-in wardrobe area. It's nothing really that fancy or special, just trying to create something I felt like would fit the theme and vibe that I was trying to go for this bedroom itself as well. And yeah, just like trying to incorporate some very nice and extravagant looking mirrors as well throughout the entire home as well, which looked really nice and very detailed as well. But yeah, so moving on into the primary bedroom's ensuite, we do actually start off by placing this very fancy looking bathtub right where the sort of window area is. And I just also wanted to incorporate a very nice looking double sink unit area, if that makes sense. So I just utilized some standalone sink units and just like incorporated the base game counter in the middle of it, which I feel like looked really nice. And I actually really loved the division between the countertops and the different colors that I was utilizing. I feel like it actually matched really nicely, even though they weren't really up to scale with each other. It sort of like fit really nicely in my opinion. And we do also utilize these very nice brass framed mirrors on either side of the sink units, which I feel like also looked really interesting. And I also wanted to incorporate some sort of walk-in shower unit area just by like creating a 2x1 tiled one, just like trying to keep it relatively simple, especially since we didn't really have quite a lot of space to work with. I still feel like it turned out really nicely in the end as well. And I did also end up utilizing some of the clutter pieces for the bathroom as well as incorporating the very nice modern looking standalone fireplace which came from Business and Hobbies as well. And I did actually want to incorporate the brass wall sconces that we had going across the entire home within this ensuite as well, because I feel like it worked out really nicely with the rest of the colors that we had. And I did of course also replace some of the saucer lights that we have going across the entire home to be like their own dedicated sort of wall lighting piece, if that makes sense. So I didn't want to have a lot of like spotlights going across the entire home, but rather just like have specific ones that sort of like fit the theme that we're trying to go for a bit more, in my opinion. And yeah, just like added some small additional clutter pieces throughout the bedroom as well, just like trying to make it feel a bit more traditional and just like trying to create a bit more character throughout all of the bedrooms itself as well. But yeah, moving on into the nursery area, we do have a relatively small space for the nursery, but I feel like it works out really nice because it feels a bit more cozy and it still incorporates all of the functional objects that you would probably expect within a nursery anyway. And I decided to go with the Storybook Nursery crib and rocking chair because I just feel like they worked really nicely within this build in particular, especially since we're trying to go for that more elegant and traditional looking theme. I feel like although they focus a more gothic-y sort of theme, I still feel like it works really nicely within the traditional realms and styles, because I feel like they incorporate a lot of detail within the furniture pieces itself, so it kind of just like makes sense to utilize them within this build itself as well. And just like trying to create a fun looking room just by like adding some cloud detailings on the rug, as well as like for the lighting fixture itself, as well as like incorporating a nice simple curtain right where the sort of like windows are, and just like adding curtains that have specific detailings on it, such as like the cats and dogs one, which I feel like added a nice sort of like nice characteristic touch to the build, in my opinion. Yeah, so once I finished up decorating the rest of the nursery, I just ran around the entire home, such as like the hallways and the balcony areas, and just like added some additional furniture pieces, which I feel like kind of made the home feel a bit more complete, in my opinion, as well as just like adding some nice additional seating areas and some more instruments around the piano, just to make it feel a bit more finished and completed as well. But yeah, that seems to be pretty much it for this entire speed build. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think by leaving a like and subscribing, and comment down below your thoughts and suggestions. I'd love to know what you guys think about this build overall. And I do also have a bunch more videos like this on the channel if you guys are interested in things like these. But yeah, thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.